She was not the kind of woman who checked her husband's phone. In 11 years of marriage, she had never once felt the need to. Not because she was naive, not because she refused to acknowledge that marriages could contain secrets, but because she had simply never been given a reason. Chidi had always been an open book, or so she believed. His phone sat on the kitchen counter. His laptop stayed open on the dining table. He answered calls in the living room with the easy, relaxed manner of someone with nothing to conceal. Ngozi had built her understanding of her husband on 11 years of observed evidence. That morning, the evidence changed. She was not looking at his phone. She had reached across the kitchen counter for the car keys, and his phone had lit up beside them, the screen bright with a notification she was not trying to read and could not help seeing. She thought briefly, as she sometimes did without reason, about a particular Tuesday evening 11 years earlier, when they had sat in a one-room flat in Surulere eating cold rice because the gas had run out and neither of them had money for a new cylinder until Friday. Chidi had made her laugh so hard that evening that she had forgotten to be hungry. She had thought, sitting there in that flat with him, this is the person I am building something with. Then she looked at the screen. A WhatsApp message from a name she recognized. Not because it was a name she had expected, because it was a name she knew, a name she had said warmly to other people, a name attached to a face she had welcomed into her home. The message said, "Mama has been asking about you. She said you should try to come before the end of the month." Ngozi stood in the kitchen with the car keys in one hand and her husband's phone in the other. She read the message again and again. "Mama has been asking about you." Not asking about both of you, not asking when you and your wife are coming to visit, asking about him specifically. And the question was not whether he was well. The question was when he was coming, as if coming was already established, as if there was a pattern of visits that needed only to be scheduled rather than initiated. Before the end of the month, a deadline. Ngozi put the phone down exactly where she had found it. She picked up the car keys. She walked out of the kitchen, and she sat in her packed car in her own compound for 45 minutes without starting the engine, because something had just shifted in the atmosphere of her life, and she needed to sit still long enough to feel the full shape of it. Before we continue, dear friends, welcome back to this channel. If you are watching for the first time, this is the place for stories that do not flinch from the truth. Stories about love that was real, sacrifice that was genuine, and the specific kind of betrayal that can only be committed by someone who was fully trusted. Please take a moment to like this video, drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. I read every comment, every single one. Now let us go back to the beginning, because to understand what that message meant, you need to understand who Ngozi was and what she had given before any of this happened. Ngozi grew up in Enugu. She was the second of 5 children in a household where her father drove a long-haul truck and her mother ran a small fabric stall in the main market. They were not poor in the way that poverty announces itself. They were simply a family whose resources required careful management and whose children understood from a young age that nothing arrived without effort behind it. She studied accounting at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. She was focused in the specific way that people are focused when they understand the cost of the opportunity they have been given and do not intend to waste it. She graduated with a second-class upper and began working at a mid-size auditing firm in Enugu before transitioning to Lagos 3 years later when a better opportunity presented itself. She met Chidi at a professional networking event in Lagos Island. He was 32. She was 28. He was working in logistics at the time, a small company he had co-founded with a friend, smart but not yet significant. He had a manner about him that she later described to her sister as quietly ambitious. Not the loud ambition that announces itself in the first 5 minutes of meeting someone, the kind that reveals itself gradually in how he listened, in the questions he asked, in the way he tracked information and connected people in his mind before he spoke. She was drawn to this quality because she recognized it. She had been called quietly ambitious herself. They dated for 2 years before he proposed. During those 2 years, she watched him work. She also watched him struggle. The logistics company hit a difficult patch in the second year, a major client defaulting on payment and leaving a significant gap in the business's cash flow. Chidi's co-founder pulled out. The business was close to collapse. She was not yet his wife. She helped him anyway. She introduced him to 2 of her own professional contacts who had warehousing needs. She spent 3 evenings helping him restructure his pitch document and his pricing model. She lent him money from her own savings, enough to cover 2 months of operational costs while he stabilized the business. He paid her back within 4 months. She told her sister afterward that the repayment mattered less than what it told him about him. A man who repays what he borrowed from someone he loves before he is asked is a man with a certain kind of character. She decided she wanted to build a life with that character. They got married in December. Her father cried during the ceremony, which was the first time she had seen him cry for anything that was not grief. The first few years of their marriage were the Gary years. Not literally, though there were months that came close, but the Gary years in the sense of years where the future is visible and the present is difficult, and the combination of the two requires a specific kind of faith that cannot be performed, only lived. Chidi's logistics business had recovered from its collapse, but it had not yet grown into what he believed it could be. The revenue was modest, the potential was significant. The gap between the two required investment he did not have and time he was willing to give. Ngozi gave what she had. There was a particular bag she had wanted for 3 years. Not an expensive bag by any significant measure, a quality leather tote she had seen in a shop on Lagos Island and photographed on her phone as a future purchase. She walked past that shop 4 times over those 3 years. Each time something else was more urgent. His business costs, the children's school fees, the month when 2 large expenses arrived in the same week and only one of them could be addressed. She never bought the bag. She did not think of this as a sacrifice. She thought of it as an ordinary decision, the ordinary daily arithmetic of a woman building something with someone else. She restructured her own career to maximize their combined income. She took on additional consulting work on weekends, tax auditing for small businesses, the kind of work that is unglamorous and time-consuming but generates reliable income in a way that employed positions sometimes do not. She managed their household budget with the discipline of someone who had watched her mother manage a fabric stall on a market salary and understood that every naira had a purpose. She opened doors. This is the part that mattered most in the long run and was remembered least in the short run. She introduced Chidi to her professional network deliberately and generously. Her former supervisor at the auditing firm, a woman with extensive connections in the import-export space, a client she had developed a warm professional relationship with, who moved significant goods through Lagos and needed reliable logistics. Her uncle, a quiet man with surprising influence in the Enugu business community, who agreed to meet Chidi based on her recommendation alone. Each introduction opened something. The import-export woman became Chidi's largest client for 2 years. The Lagos businessman became a long-term partner whose referrals brought in 3 additional major accounts. Her uncle's connection led to a government contract that established Chidi's business as a credible player in the federal supply chain. Ngozi made none of these introductions loudly. She made them the way she did everything, carefully, with follow-through, ensuring that when Chidi walked into those rooms, he walked in with her credibility preceding him. He grew. His business grew. The modest logistics operation expanded into a larger distribution company with real infrastructure, real staff, and real revenue. She was proud of him. She was also, quietly, and without naming it even to herself, the architect of a significant portion of his success. The success brought changes. Not immediately, not in a single dramatic moment of transformation, but gradually, in the way that changes happen to people when resources increase faster than wisdom deepens. Chidi began moving in circles that his business had opened to him. Events, associations, the kind of social infrastructure that exists in Lagos for people who have arrived at a certain level of visibility. He was at ease in these spaces in a way that Ngozi was pleased to observe. He had the intelligence, Now he had the platform for it. She attended some of these events with him and stayed home from others by choice. She had her own career, her own network, her own professional community. She was not interested in being present at every gathering simply to affirm her position as his wife. She trusted him. She had always trusted him. She did not believe that trust required surveillance. This was not naive. It was the considered position of a woman who had built an 11-year marriage on the evidence of a man's character and had no reason yet to revise her assessment. The girl had come to them through Chidi's business network. She was the younger sister of a man who distributed goods through Chidi's company, a young man Chidi had worked with for years and trusted completely. The brother mentioned it to Chidi over a business lunch. Chidi mentioned it to Ngozi over dinner. The sister had completed her WAEC results and was trying to secure admission to a federal university. The portal was giving problems that had nothing to do with her qualifications and everything to do with the labyrinthine process of Nigerian university administration. The brother mentioned it to Chidi over a business lunch. Chidi mentioned it to Ngozi over dinner. Ngozi made 2 phone calls the following morning. She knew a former classmate who now worked in the Federal Ministry of Education. She knew an alumni contact at the target university. The combination of both was sufficient. The admission was sorted within 5 days. The girl came to thank them the following Saturday. She was 20, respectful, clear-eyed, genuinely grateful in the way that is distinct from performed gratitude. She brought a modest gift. She played with their youngest child, who was 3 at the time, and did not take to strangers easily. Their oldest, who was 7, showed her school books with the specific pride of a child who has decided someone is worthy of seeing his possessions. Ngozi watched this and felt the warmth of it. Before she left, the girl had stood in the doorway and looked at Ngozi with an expression that was difficult to describe. It was not just gratitude. It was the specific look of a young woman who had grown up without a mother and had just spent several hours in the company of one. She said, "I hope I can be like you one day." Ngozi had laughed and said, "Just be yourself. That's enough." She thought about that exchange sometimes in the month that followed and felt good about it. She would not feel good about it later. The girl left for school. Life continued. Ngozi's consulting work expanded. She was approached about a partnership opportunity with a larger firm and spent 6 months evaluating it before accepting. Chidi's distribution business landed its largest contract yet, a 2-year agreement with a fast-moving consumer goods company that required significant infrastructure investment. She helped him model the financial terms of the contract before he signed. Months passed, ordinary months, the texture of a functioning life. And then the messages started. Not all at once, not in a way that anyone inside the situation could have identified as a pattern from the beginning. The girl texted Chidi once to share her first semester results. He showed Ngozi. They were good. He texted back, "Congratulations," on behalf of both of them, or so Ngozi believed. What she did not know was that the conversation did not end there. That after the congratulations, there was a response, and after the response, another message, and that the conversation, which began in the open with results and congratulations, had moved to a place where Ngozi was no longer present in it. Not because she had been deliberately excluded, but because Chidi had started responding in the hours when she was not nearby and had not mentioned the continuation to her. There was an evening around this time when Ngozi came home from a particularly long client meeting and found Chidi already in bed. She changed quietly and lay down beside him and said, "Long day?" He said, "Very long." She reached over and squeezed his hand in the dark. He squeezed back. She fell asleep beside him, grateful for the ordinary comfort of a man who was still there. She did not know that he had spent part of that long day in a different part of Lagos entirely. The conversations became frequent, then daily, then in a shift that Chidi would later describe as gradual enough that he had talked himself into believing it was harmless at each individual stage. They became intimate. The girl was 20. She had grown up without parents. She had been shown significant kindness by a man of means and standing. The psychology of what happened is not difficult to trace. What is harder to trace and harder to forgive is what Chidi chose to do with his understanding of that dynamic. He chose to exploit it. There was a Sunday morning several months into this when Ngozi sat across from him at the breakfast table and said, "You seem distracted lately. Are you all right?" He said, "Just business pressure, nothing serious." She nodded. She made a mental note to be more present for him in the evenings, to ask more about the business, to make more space for him in whatever was weighing him. She was already planning how to support him through something she did not yet know was happening because of him. He ate his breakfast. He thanked her for it. And that afternoon, he drove across Lagos to a woman who was carrying his child. Ngozi did not know any of this when the pregnancy was confirmed. She did not know it when Chidi, sitting with a decision that most men in his position would have found catastrophic, chose to manage it not by confession, but by arrangement. He paid the bride price. Quietly, privately, with the girl's family, including the mother who later sent the message that lit up his phone screen on an ordinary Tuesday morning. In Igbo tradition, the payment of bride price is a formal act by which a man takes a woman as his wife. It involves family, it involves ceremony, it involves the explicit acknowledgement of the man's community of what he is doing. Chidi performed all of this behind Ngozi's back, while living in the house she helped furnish, while sleeping in the bed she shared, while accepting the professional introductions she continued to make on her behalf because she still believed she was doing them for their shared future. He had a second wife, and Ngozi was ironing his shirts. She sat in the car for 45 minutes that morning. When she went back inside, she said nothing. She prepared breakfast, she walked the children, she managed the morning routine with the same efficiency she brought to every morning. Chidi moved through the kitchen beside her and she handed him his coffee and she watched his face for any indication that he knew he knew. He knew nothing. She spent 3 days gathering what she needed before she confronted him. Not because she was afraid, because she was thorough, because she had been an accountant long enough to know that evidence collected before a confrontation is considerably more useful than evidence sought after one. She accessed the joint account statements, she reviewed the transactions she had not examined before, transfers she had noticed and dismissed as business-related that now, viewed in a different light, told a different story. She spoke quietly to a woman she trusted who had navigated a similar situation and knew the legal landscape. On the 4th day, she confronted him. The conversation that followed was one of the most devastating of her adult life, not because of anything Chidi said, but because of the speed with which the architecture of the lie began to visible once it began to collapse. He had told her that particular trip was a site visit. He had told her that money was for equipment. He had told her that evening was a client dinner. Each explanation she had accepted in good faith was now sitting in front of her revealed as a deliberate construction. When it was fully out, when every piece of it was on the table, he said he was sorry. He said he still loved her. He said the other woman was a mistake that had grown beyond his control. He said he wanted her to stay. Ngozi looked at her husband of 11 years for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "I need you to understand what you are asking me to forgive." He said he understood. She said, "No, you understand the act. You do not yet understand what the act cost." Then she said something else that he would think about for a long time afterward. "I need you to hear this clearly. A man who loves you and does this to you is more dangerous than a man who stopped loving you and did the same thing, because the first man will do it again and call it love both times." Chidi did not speak. She did not explain further. She began the process of ending the marriage the following week. The year that followed was one of the hardest of her life. Chidi did not sign easily. He tried everything men try when they realize the woman they have underestimated has decided to leave and cannot be dissuaded. He sent his relatives, he sent elders, he sent mutual friends who arrived at her door with carefully rehearsed appeals. She received them all with courtesy and sent them away with clarity. When the appeals failed, he threatened the children. This is the part that I want you to hear clearly. The man that she had introduced to every room that mattered, the man whose business still ran on the infrastructure of her connections and her capital, that man told her that if she proceeded with the divorce, she would not see her children. He said this to a woman who had delivered both of those children and spent every year since ensuring they had what they needed. She drove home from that conversation and sat in the car outside the house for a long time. Inside, she could hear her children. One of them was arguing about the television remote, the other was asking for water. The ordinary noise of two children in a house where someone still cared for them. She thought about what he had just said. Then she picked up her phone and called her lawyer. Not because she was certain of the outcome, but because she understood that this was now a different kind of fight and it required a different kind of response. Not grief, not argument, documentation. She had been an accountant for 15 years and she knew how documentation worked and what it required. She documented everything that needed to be documented. She moved with a specific, methodical precision of someone who has spent her career understanding how evidence works and what it required. She filed what needed to be filed. She engaged the process fully and without panic because panic is the enemy of documentation, and documentation was what was going to protect her children. Chidi signed the divorce papers 14 months after she started the process. Not because he had arrived at peace with it, but because by that point, his attention had entirely moved to the new household. The second wife was settled, the new arrangement was his present reality. And the effort required to continue fighting a woman who was fighting with evidence rather than emotion was a cost he had lost the motivation to pay. He signed. She walked out of the lawyer's office with the papers and did not look back. The children, as children do when they are raised by women who never stop showing up, made their own clarity known over time. They were old enough to know things parents sometimes forget children know. They knew who had been at every school event. They knew who answered the phone at midnight when one of them was running a fever. They knew who had held the family together during the year when everything else was falling apart. Children always know. She did not collapse after the divorce. She grieved. She grieved properly, the way you grieve when something you invested 11 years of your best self into has been permanently altered. She cried in private and did not perform wellness for people who did not deserve her honesty. But she was not broken. She was the kind of woman who understood that grief and collapse are not the same thing. She returned to her professional network. She completed the partnership with the larger firm. She rebuilt her own financial foundation with the same systematic care she had once applied to building his. Her name began appearing in professional circles in ways it had not appeared during the years when she was primarily investing her energy in someone else's visibility. And one afternoon, walking past a shop on Lagos Island that she had passed many times before, she went in. The leather tote was still there. She bought it without hesitation. It was a small thing. It was also, in the specific quiet way of small things, everything. 3 years after the divorce, a man of significant standing asked to be introduced to her through a mutual contact. She was not looking, but she was not closed. He was straightforward. He was patient. He was the kind of man who had enough of his own that he was not interested in anyone else's. He had watched her from across a professional gathering and asked his contact who she was and been told a version of the story. He had said, that kind of woman is worth knowing. They married 2 years later, a small ceremony, deliberate and dignified. Her children stood beside her. her people and her people, gathered around a woman who had been told by her first husband that she would not have access to her children, watched her begin a new chapter with the same quiet precision she had applied to everything else in her life. Someone asked her once, a journalist writing a profile, whether she ever thought about those 11 years as wasted time. Ngozi thought about the question for a moment. Then she said, "Nothing invested in genuine effort is wasted. It simply builds something in you that you carry forward. The problem is that most people can only see what was lost. They cannot see what was built in the losing." The journalist wrote that down. Ngozi thought about it herself for the rest of the day. She decided it was true, not as comfort, as fact. Every skill she had developed during those years was still hers. Every relationship she had built was still hers. Every quality she had refined under pressure was still hers. He took a decade. He could not take the woman the decade had made. As for Chidi, what happened after Ngozi walked out belongs more to consequence than to her story. The second wife, fully settled in the house Ngozi had helped build, began to grow comfortable in a way that comfort sometimes makes people careless. She heard about an investment opportunity through a contact she had made independently, a deal that promised significant returns on a significant sum. She brought it to Chidi with confidence. He trusted her judgment because he had always trusted his wife's judgment in business, or so he believed, though the wife whose judgment had actually served him was no longer in the room. The investment was not what it appeared. The people behind it were not who they claimed to be. The funds were traced. The man who told Ngozi she would not see her children was eventually in no position to make decisions about anyone's access to anything. And the woman he had tried to contain was building something new, with her name on it, with her children beside her, in a life that belonged entirely to her. There is something I want to say before we close this story. Every seed a person plants eventually becomes visible, sometimes on their timeline, sometimes on yours. The seeds of love, the seeds of sacrifice, the seeds of betrayal, the seeds of loyalty, they all grow in forms we do not always predict, on schedules we did not design. Ngozi planted seeds for 11 years. She planted them in professional introductions, in restructured pitch documents, in consulting fees redirected towards someone else's business capital, in the quiet daily work of building a life with another person. Those seeds did not disappear when he betrayed her. They transferred. They came with her. Every skill she had developed, every relationship she had built, every quality she had cultivated through the years of sacrifice, it all came with her into the next chapter because none of it had actually belonged to him. It had always been hers. He took the house. He took a decade. He could not take the woman the decade had made. And your season, whatever you are carrying right now, whatever you have given that seems to have gone unacknowledged or been turned against you, your season is already in motion. You may simply not be able to see it from where you are standing, but it is moving. It is always moving. Drop a comment below. Tell me which moment of Ngozi's story stayed with you. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Share this with one person who needs to hear that what they have given has not been lost, only transferred, and that the transfer, when it completes, will surprise everyone who thought they understood the transaction. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story on this channel. Before you go, click the video on your screen right now. Another story is waiting for you. Until next time, every seed grows. Good night.